How can our most exciting innovative breakthroughs be found through looking with insatiable curiosity at the mundane? And in what ways does the future of our cities and architecture rely on harnessing the trinity of intelligence that is collective, natural, and artificial? Finally, what are the potentials and limits of AI in designing for culture in our built environments with nuance and sensibility? Today, on the 5th episode of Archfolio, is our guest Carlo Ratti to share with us his answers. Hello everyone, I'm your host Julian, and welcome to episode 5 of the Archfolio. When we speak of intelligence in today's architectural climate, it seems as though artificial intelligence has stormed over, replacing hand-sketched human-thought designs with optimized sterile form finding, or proposing instant, over-generated plans for projects that hold palimpsests of history and context. It has thus never been more pressing to maintain and keep in dialogue the other forms of intelligence that have defined architecture up until now, the natural and collective. In times of adaptation, it's this trinity of knowledge that design must manifest itself, and today's guest is one of the strongest, most active ambassadors of this ethos. Indeed, Professor Carlo Ratti believes that architecture needs to reach out across generations and across disciplines, an idea equally at the heart of this podcast, and that design must become as flexible and dynamic as the world we are now designing for. As I just mentioned, joining us today is Carlo Ratti, an architect and engineer by training who teaches at Politecnico di Milano and MIT. He is a scientist, designer, and public intellectual working on the future of cities and the built environment, contributing through his work as a founding partner of Carlo Ratti Associati and director of the Senseable City Lab at MIT. One of the top 10 most cited scholars in urban planning, Carlo has co-authored over 750 publications and exhibited in countless countries around the globe, most notably at the 19th Venice Architecture Biennale, which he curated in 2025. So it is with such excitement and honor that we welcome today Carlo Ratti. Welcome to the podcast, Carlo.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Where are you joining from around the world?
I just arrived in Italy, so we are quite close, I think.
Okay, we are very close. In Torino?
Today in Torino, yes, be in Milan later today.
Oh, you'll be in Milan later today? Oh, that's incredible. We're here in the Milan studio. You're the first guest ever to be on the podcast on Zoom. So thank you for joining via Torino. And how has life been for you? Has it been very busy right now, or is it kind of a down period after the classes at Politecnico have finished?
Look, classes was great fun. And, I should say this year has been a bit more quiet. Last year with the Venice Biennale, it was a bit hectic. I mean, I loved it. It was a way to really put together a community and think together as architects, how we can focus on adaptation. And also, as you were saying, in a very nice way, how we should look at the intelligence much, much beyond today's idea of AI and LLMs.
Oh, exactly. I mean, like you were speaking about hectic, but I'm sure it's a very positive hectic, All these accomplishments and accolades must be so fulfilling. And as a student myself, it's very inspiring to see you pioneer what you're doing. Our podcast also has a strong place for studenthood. And so I kind of want to take it back with you first in the first half of the conversation and ask a bit about the journey you did through academia and your career. I mean, you graduated as an engineer and architect from Politecnico di Torino and the École Nationale des Ponts et Chaussées in Paris. And then you pursued a Master of Philosophy in Architecture at the University of Cambridge. And so I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to pursue a more advanced research-based postgraduate degree instead of a traditional master's? And how do you feel like that experience helped you explore the topics with which you hoped to pave a path for in the industry?
Yeah. No, thank you for asking. And, I'm going to say something quite trivial at the moment, but actually, which is everybody has heard, the beautiful speech that Steve Jobs gave at Stanford for commencement. And that's about where he talks about lining the dots. And the idea is very simple. The idea is that if you follow your passion, if you follow what you like, then you follow your heart, then, you might sometimes do something that looks a bit weird. It looks meandering. You go from one thing to another. Steve Jobs says, he had financial troubles, and he still looked at took classes in graphic design or calligraphy. But then Apple would not have been Apple without that. And he explains it by saying, again, if you follow what you love, then you cannot line the dots moving forward, but you can do it when you look backwards. They will line up for you. And I need to say, that I kind of felt something similar. When I finished Pont de Chaussée as an engineer in France, Pont de Chaussée opens many doors in the French system, and all my
Yes.
friends and colleagues were just getting to big responsibilities and getting top jobs in industry or in government. And I decided I wanted, however, to explore more design. I was passionate about design, and that's when I went to Cambridge. And Cambridge had this beautiful place called the Martin Center. It's still there. The Martin Center was started by Leslie Martin. So Leslie Martin is an interdisciplinary place. So in Cambridge, you would find people from mathematics, from physics, working with others, and from design, from architecture, from planning. And so that for me was great. And in the beginning, again, many people were asking me, what the hell, what do you want to do next? And then when you look back, it all made sense.
That's very powerful. And speaking about like the metaphor of connecting the dots, when you were pursuing it at Cambridge, did you feel like the dots were starting to connect in terms of the research you wanted to pursue? Or was it very much finding the dot when you were at Cambridge and then transitioning to your PhD?
You shouldn't really think too much about the lining up, about the dots. I think you should do it again. Just follow, as Steve Jobs was saying, the things you like. And then, you would discover later that there's a logic, and that logic is you. That logic is your heart, which then will make the dots line up. So no worries as you're moving through your studies. I'm saying this also to all the students in Milano. This year, by the way, also with this idea of bringing together different skills.
I think that's very powerful. Thank you for that. And now, like when we talk about your journey as you went from PhD into postdoc, what's interesting was that at the same time that you were evolving in your studies at MIT, technology was also rapidly developing, like you were evolving in synchronicity with that. And so around the 2000s era, when the term big data was coined and you were out of school and eager to practice, how did your work, and your research dialogue with shifts in technology? Do you feel like you were more on the speculative design side, or were you first enraptured by the ability to harness large-scale data? What intrigued you, and what made you go in that direction once you graduated?
It's a very interesting question. I think, certainly at every time you've got new technologies, and that means new opportunities. And as an architect, you always want to explore it. Think about Paolo Uccello in the Renaissance and discovering perspective. And that becomes a way to rethink the way you paint and the way you build and the way you represent. So that was a new technology at the time. So you always want to be aware of it, but never be led by the technology. And so in our case, the idea was really how could we, for instance, understand the city as a living organism? That was the guiding principle. And then technology, turns out, through networks, through data, through big data, allowed it. Or many of the ideas we've done later, like we did a project 2 years in around 2009 that at the time was talked about a lot, was at the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It was about tracking waste and seeing where waste goes. Again, the technology allows us to do it, but the question was a different one. The question was, can we reduce the amount of waste, and can we see when things go in the wrong place? When we throw away things, what happens to them? So again, you need to be aware of technology. Like today, you need to be aware of LLMs, but don't be driven by technology. What you want to do is driven by the other side, by the human side. At the MIT lab, we call it sensible, as able to sense and sensible. So be driven by the idea of a more sensible city.
Right. That driven not by technology, but by your curiosity is, I think, one of your strongest skills that you have, your ability to look towards the mundane, like, for example, trash, and track it around the world and see over the scale of how many months it's traveled around the US when you conduct that experience. And that, as you mentioned, is best manifested in your work at Senseable City, which has now also burgeoned in other cities. And just out of intrigue and fascination, I want to ask, how do the first research proposals compare to the ones you lead today? Is there an evolution? Is it still driven by that curiosity? I mean, of course it is, but how is the assistance of technology shaping that today compared to back then?
Yeah, if you look at technology, even just over the past 5 years, if you think that the LEMS technology has changed
Yeah,
immensely. We've been
immensely.
using AI, like deep learning, for
Mhm.
a while now, but LLMs are opening new perspectives and so on. But yes, ultimately the starting point, the question, which can be about a piece of waste, it can be about a piece of pardon the word, piece of shit when we started working in sewage. We did a project called Underworld, where we actually started sequencing sewage to understand something about our collective microbiome, all the bugs
Wow.
in our guts that are collected into sewage. And so the project actually led to a big company called Biobot that during COVID, we started this just before COVID. During COVID was a company that sequenced sewage in all the United States in order to look if at the presence of COVID. And we had a big partnership with Fauci and the CDC. So
Wow.
in that case, you always start from something at times mundane, at times small thing you notice. Another project I remember that had a lot of impact in New York, in that project called HubCab, led actually Uber to launch Uber Pool, which now is Uber Shares, so sharing of rides. And that starts from a very simple thing that I many times in New York, I was at a hotel, was going to the airport, waiting for a taxi 10 years ago. And next to me, there was somebody else with a trolley, possibly going to the same airport. But I did not. With a shared taxi, and then we try to quantify that with a paper in PNAS, in the Presidio National Academies of Science, to mathematically find a new way to solve the problem, which is a design problem about how we could think about mobility in a different way. And out of that, people started talking. The New York Times ran an article, but that is what led Uber to start a collaboration with us. And Uber Pool, Uber Share, how people can share better trips came out of that. And that was very mundane. It was about being at 6 a.m. in New York with a trolley and seeing somebody next to me with another trolley and asking, could we share a ride?
I think that's like one of our past guests mentioned about looking to the mundane as one of the biggest sources of inspiration, and I think you exude that so well. And there's so much excitement to the work when it's re-exploring something we've always seen but have kind of glanced past. But sometimes when we explore some of these exciting projects we have, the results can not be what we expect. Sometimes research can get detoured or dismissed. Was there a personal time when you encountered a setback in the early days of your career as an architect that you had to overcome? And what lessons or what new ideas did that spur in you?
Well, first of all, as many of you will be one day architects, designers, or dealing with creativity in different ways. I think what we're seeing at MIT in particular is that people, are thinking about a new persona, a new type of architect that's emerging, a new type of designer. But in that space, think about failures will be numerous. If you do competitions, for instance, as an architect, usually if it's an invited competition, you're one of the finalists. There's usually 10 of them, and only one will win. So you need to learn how to lose 90% of the time on average, right? So there's so many things that are ideas that you liked, you fell in love with the ideas, and then somehow they will be killed one way or another. So yes, the path of design, but that's part of the beauty of it. I think a good way to think about this is similar to what nature does. Nature tries so many things. Some will succeed, some will not. And what we can do in the world of the artificial, the world of cities, of building, of objects, is something similar. It's thinking about, developing ideas, projects. Sometimes you mentioned before speculative design. Sometimes they will just a speculation. Sometimes there will be an idea that people talk about will never materialize. Sometimes they become a prototype, and sometimes, if we're lucky, they also become the real thing and can scale up.
There's so much power in that idea of trying, and even if there's rejection, that you can redirect it, you can experiment, and having that tenacity, I think, is an essential skill for architecture and designer nowadays. And you were speaking about this rise of a new type of architecture that's sort of being brewed as we speak. Do you have any final advice in this first half of the podcast to give to students who maybe want to challenge what the definition of an architect is?
Yes, of course. So first of all, I would say two things. One, if you look at architecture in a traditional sense about dealing with the built environment and so on, certainly that is changing. It's becoming much less the old idea of Corbusier, the kind of one single
Mm-hmm.
architects, Promethean architects deciding for millions of people like he did in the 1920s with the Plan Voisin. It is much more collaborative between people, between designers and users. AI can facilitate those conversations, but also collaborative across disciplines. So this is still when dealing with the built environment. But what you're seeing more and more is also that a lot of the people graduating from our lab and so on end up in more hybrid fields, which is not really about the building itself or the built environment, but by using the same skills in order to innovate elsewhere in society. And I think that's, you could call it also a broader, more expanded version of the architect or the designer.
Yeah, the notion of hybrid, I think, and cross-disciplinary, and the term you use is omnidisciplinary. I think the rise of those types of designers and architects are imminent, and it's going to be exciting to see how and what they bring to the field. So thank you again for this first half of the podcast, and we'll be right back to discuss about your design ethos and preserving urban and collective intelligence in how we design. Welcome back to the second half. We were speaking about connecting the dots, and now it's time to see where the dots have led in the passion of Carlo. And I wanted to start by first telling you about my first encounter with your work in philosophy, which in part inspired the conversation I wanted to have with you today. So last year, I had the fortunate opportunity to visit the Biennale twice in Venice, and truthfully, it was the first time I understood the power of applying artificial intelligence in city planning and architecture, because I'm someone who uses AI very sporadically for the occasional question that Google can't answer. But it was groundbreaking to see the scale and scope of its ability when harnessed for good. And to establish a contextual baseline for the conversation, could you explain the current state and involvement of artificial intelligence in the research and work you do? Are you working with algorithms, databases, generative models? What's the concrete manifestation of AI in architecture as of right now?
Yes, very happy to comment on that. First of all, the first thing I want to say is that, again, when people say AI today, a lot of people have a short circuit in the brain and think about LLMs,
Yes.
ChatGPT, Claude, that type of things. And those things are very powerful. Don't get me wrong. They will change a lot of things in society, but also very dumb. Dumb in the sense that the best way to understand them is in the way that the great computer scientists in the United States, one put it recently, which is their stochastic parrots. Why parrots? Because they know everything. You train them. That's why they're so energy intensive. You need to learn everything. And then stochastically, they vomit. They bring back some of the things based on a question. Some of the things are related to the thing. At the same time, they can be very powerful because by doing that, they can, for instance, translate very well. They imagine somebody who has all the books ever written, knows all of them, and he did all the different languages, can translate very well. In just a few years, unfortunately, the word of translators has vanished. You just have a few of them, really high-end, but translations now are being commoditized. So it can be very powerful, but also quite dumb, if you allow me to say that, in the sense that they're simply stochastic parrots. Now, AI is much bigger already. AI means, for instance, deep learning. Deep learning is a different beast, and we've been using deep learning at the lab for a long time, at the lab or the office. Deep learning allowed us last year to do a nice project in New York. I'll tell you a little story. In the 1970s and 80s in New York, there was a person called William Holly White. And Holly White was a great urbanist. He wrote beautiful books, and he was passionate at the time about new technologies. And one of the things he did, at the time, a new technology was Super 8 cameras. So he took this kind of old Super 8 cameras and started filming the life of New York City, this kind of ballet on sidewalks, in parks, and so on, to see how people come together, how we make friends in public space, how they changes based on the time of the day, how really the agora is that very important glue of the city that dates back to Athens and ancient Greece, how that works. And he was doing that. He discovered many things. By the way, if any of you goes to New York, and if you go to the beautiful Bryant Park next to New York Public Library, just say thank you, Hollywood, because thanks to his work, he was able to preserve it. We might not have Bryant Park without the beautiful groundbreaking work of Hollywood at the time.
Wow.
Now, if you read his books, he says taking footage, taking video is great. Again, with these kind of clunky Super 8 cameras, but analyzing is very difficult. He had an army of students and researchers to annotate frame by frame. Today, with deep learning, you can teach a system, one of these kind of different beasts. Deep learning can run on your computer, doesn't need all the power of an LLM. You just teach it. For instance, how to recognize people, what people are doing, how far people are. And so you gave it what's called a training set. You teach it, and then the system will keep on doing the same thing on its own. And so what we did last year in this paper, we actually took all the footage by William White, by Holly White in New York from 50 years ago. We looked at contemporary footage in the same places, and we used AI to analyze both the old and the new footage. And for instance, we discovered something very puzzling, that the way we interact in public space has changed. 50 years ago, people were going to Bryant Park or other places to make friends. They looked at each other, they would interact, they would like and dislike each other. You see beautiful movies and videos that Holly White shot at the time. And today, actually, we're much more in our own bubble. We look at our phone and, even, believe it or not, we walk 15% faster today than 50 years ago. Because again, we don't look around, we just look at the phone and walk fast. We only slow down when, by looking at the phone, we bump into a street lamp in the street pole. But otherwise, we walk faster. And so we discovered that. And that's one example of how to use AI to understand the city, not LLMs, but deep learning applied to images.
There's so much capacity and possibility with deep learning. And deep learning, does it sort of combine and analyze data that we collect? Or is it a sort of interface that users, whether it be the public or private, can interact with?
Look, deep learning is, and now, by the way, with LLMs allow vibe coding, as you know, so a lot of people can code themselves, so you can easily spend a weekend in order to do your own deep learning analysis. But think about deep learning, kind of a simplified brain that will learn very quickly how to do things, and not as certainly much more primitive brain than the human brain. But the good thing is that you learn something that can be very quick at executing. So as I was saying, deep learning, you can teach it how to analyze Holly White's footage from 50 years ago and to detect every person, see where they are, in the shade or not, and so on. And then in a second, you could do what Holly White was doing in months of work, frame by frame.
Understood. Yeah, that just holds incredible power. And like when you apply it for good, I think it can have so much possibility and potential for change. And it's very powerful, but it needs to work within the trinity of collective, natural, and artificial to kind of bring it back to the other types of intelligence. Deep learning is extremely capable and it can speed up the process, but it needs to be checked and balanced with other intelligences such as collective and natural that you brought up before. And I feel like your practice uses this ethos to design and to understand the world as it is today. How do you navigate the balance between using deep learning to create meaningful architecture and trying to not fall into the trap of the trend of recent corporation performative AI washing, where they take scripts and programs as prophecy? How do you manage this fine line between the two?
Yeah, I like your definition of prophecy. But yes, what we try to do at the Biennale and what we try to do in our daily life, again, use this kind of evolutionary metaphor, which is, it is very well known that, the mechanism that you find in natural evolution, how nature lets things evolve, is quite similar to what happens with the artificial. Again, the artificial is buildings, cities, objects. At the time of Darwin, it turns out there was a contemporary of Darwin called Samuel Butler. And Samuel Butler wrote this very interesting article, Darwin Amongst the Machines, which is a bit ironic. He actually but uses this kind of the same principle that you got in evolution also for the evolution of machines. It's quite funny also because it then says, well, machine are using ourselves to reproduce themselves. Then it gives almost this kind of ironic agency to the machine. But if you look at this, it is philosophical. The way we're doing things is not different. You think about the evolution from phone to smartphone to what you got today, there is almost kind of mutations, and some of them, one day you got Steve Jobs who comes with a mutated phone, and guess what? That becomes the iPhone, and that opens a whole new ecosystem on how we interface with each other, with apps, and with the city. So if you look at the thing, then it becomes a way where you can also interface, and you can leverage all the tools at your disposal in order to think, to create new designs, to test new designs. Some they will fail, spectacular failures, some will succeed. And that's when you want really to certainly not to limit yourself to LLMs, not to deep learning, not to AI at all, and look at the wonderful combination. And this is what we tried to do last year with, again, Intelligens, the title of the Venice Biennale that I directed last year, and a natural artificial collective learning from nature, from the artificial course, but also from the collective, the shared intelligence, which is what has shaped cities for so long, learning from each other, generation upon generation.
You brought up the very valuable point of calling back to the title of the Biennale last year, intelligens. That's a neologism of intelligence and the Latin word gens. And this flows exactly with how I was thinking, in the sense of the human and cultural aspect and context AI is unable to grasp entirely. So then when we think of involving them in designing something for humans, what are the extents of digital computation in the role of improving the intangible aspects of the built environment?
By the way, thank you for mentioning that is intelligens. People listening should know more about that. So the title was Intelligence, as said, Natural Artificial Collective, but we spelled it like intelligens, which is the Latin root, but also then in Latin, it has this kind of two meanings, which is intelligence, but also there's kind of an apocryphal root, which is gens, which in Latin is collective, is people, is about being together. So yes, this was not really a neologism, it was a proper Latin past principle of the verb intelligere, but at the same time, you could read in it also this kind of secondary apocryphal root, which was gens, which was highlighting the collective dimension of our effort. Now, so thank you for mentioning it. But by saying this, I've forgotten exactly what the question was.
No, I was. Don't worry. No, thank you for explaining that. I think it's very important for the listeners. But I was asking because intelligens, once again, deals with the collective and the palimpsests of history and culture that can be endemic to a group of people, and that's something that AI is unable to grasp. And so when we approach designs that are very sensitive to humans, what's the extent of the role of AI in this creation process? Is it something it can assist, or is it something that it's only conceivable by our human collective?
Yes, of course. And let me say another general thing about AI. We talked before about the training set. So you teach it something, and it will continue doing it. And also LLMs, this kind of stochastical power. Again, you teach them something by feeding them.
Exactly.
For instance, all of what architecture has ever produced. And then they will use that to continue doing more of the same. For instance, if you go on an LLM and say, could you do for me an image of a house on a waterfall in a beautiful forest in North America and with big rocks? Most likely you will get back something which is between Frank Lloyd Wright's iconic Falling Water.
Yes.
We probably, if you say make bigger windows, so you add a dash of Miss Van der Rohe or Philip Johnson. So we use the training set to create with a transformer. Transformer is a technical definition. This transformer will start from that, mix it, and again, as a stochastic parrot, reproduce that. And one could try that. If you do the same thing with an LLM trained until 1900, it will never be able to produce the amazing Falling Water by Flint or Wright. So it will only look at the past. It will probably produce something more similar to a mix of, I'm just guessing, Otto Wagner and other from prior century, maybe Boulez and Nicolas Ledoux, and with Arc and Senan. So we'll take inspiration from other things. We'll produce something like that. What I'm saying here is that there's something that for now, AI really cannot do. This type of AI, but all of it can be very powerful, can do what William White was doing in months, now it can do it in minutes or seconds, can also destroy entire categories such as translators, as we said before. What we cannot do is the most beautiful, powerful, important, and the most human thing of all, which is doing what has never been done, is the change of paradigm. We'll never be able, as I said, with that prompt, to create Falling Water by Frank Lloyd Wright, because that was part of creating a new universe by a person who again changed the history of design in the past century. So I think, that's the way to think about it. So it's extremely powerful, can help us a lot, can give us inspiration, can multiply referencing, can be faster than a Google, can combine many millions of Google searches together. But it cannot do the thing that for now is, again, the most beautiful and human thing, doing what hasn't been done yet.
I'm in awe of the response. And I think, yes, that's extremely, extremely valuable in what you said, and that AI will only regurgitate and it'll never be the propeller of new and something that hasn't been done before. But then when we look towards the future, right, and when we talk about designing for a future culture or designing for a future environment, AI kind of lags behind in that type of conversation. But is there a way that you could envision it to reach a more sentient state in terms of assisting in that design? Or do you feel like the culture can only be sculpted by the collective and the natural?
Look, there is a very interesting thing. I think I think we're going to see some new big developments in the next few years. I certainly see one which is about this type of AI entering physical bodies, such as humanoids. All these we had some of them at the Biennale for the first time. These humanoid robots. They are,
It's spoken French with me.
And that was actually done by Luc Steele, who was a French professor in Japan, in Tokyo, who brought that at the Biennale. But also we had next to it, in front of it, we had these kind of humanoids from Unitree, one of the most advanced companies in China, and we were using them to lay bricks. So there's going to be a big evolution of what, of our artificial world, with humanoids becoming more intelligent. I think there's also going to be, we're going to see over the next few years or decades, a big change in biology. There's a lot of research that is going to be accelerated by LLMs. So biology is going to be another interesting frontier. And then we might also have a big evolution with what people call war models. So when we get to war models, yes, then you can think about the system would be less stochastic parrot. Today, they're only trained on language. LLM are only trained on language. So they lack all that knowledge, the richness of knowledge from the environment that we collect every second by looking around, by smelling, by touching, by feeling. And so when that will be incorporated, then these systems will converge much more with us. But maybe this is also the time when, through biology, they will integrate more with us. So they will allow us to be more like, be coupled with us, to augment us, instead of being, as we see them now, more like possible competitors. So I think we're going to see many, many changes over the next few years. But when you want to look at this philosophically, it's better to take a step back. And for instance, there's a beautiful book by Louis Mumford. Louis Mumford, for any of you who's an architect or a planner, you should read not only about, but also the writings of Louis Mumford. Louis Mumford wrote probably the most beautiful book about cities. He was a scholar, researcher, journalist operating in the United States in the second half of the past century. This beautiful book of cities is called The City in History. And every architect or planner should read that book. It's one of the most important books, like Jean Jacobs' one, The Life and Death of Great American Cities, and a few others. But he also wrote a book that's less known in our community, which was written in, if I'm not wrong, late 1920s, early 1930s, Don't quote me on that. But more or less at that time, and it's called Techniques and Civilization. And you know what? He was obsessed, like society itself, about the same question we're thinking about today. Is technology going to overtake us? Is technology going to replace us? Because that was happening more in a mechanical way. People were scared. At the time, many European countries, the vast majority of people were still farmers in France, in Italy, and so on. And we know that now farmers are probably 5% of the population or less. So we went from 90% to 5% in the span of a century. And so people were scared about the changes brought by technology. And at the time, Mumford has a very nice answer, which is, again, that technology for now, and we'll see how it evolves, but is a way where we can offload some of the things we like less, the things where we're less good, the more repetitive thing. I think it's good if robots replace the life of a 20th century fiat worker. Think about, I don't know if you've ever seen the great movie by Elio Petri, La classe operaia va in paradiso, the working class goes to paradise. If a robot can replace the mechanical repetitive job, and the same people can do more exciting things with their brain, with their hands, lead a more creative life. So that's positive. It's this idea that, again, somebody else had, it was Constant, the great situationist artist in the 60s, this idea of homo ludens. So somebody, what remains to us is play and more exciting things to do. So anyway, going back to Mumford looks at the same problem we are scared about today, about this technology going to take over. Right. And his thing is, no, look, anyway, that has happened for thousands of years. We're offloading to technology some stuff, the stuff we like less, the more repetitive stuff. And then for us, we keep the stuff that's more rewarding, that's more human. And so for now, that's still the case. We'll see in a few, if singularity were to happen, we need to rediscuss this. But for now, we can be safe and just use AI as just another palette. It's just another tool together with natural, artificial, and collective.
Indeed, I think it's going to not take over, but be more enmeshed, with how we conceive and how we understand natural and collective intelligence. And with this sort of enmeshment of the two, I feel like that's where the true conversation and dialogue will happen as to what we can discover or what we can explore more of. And as a final ouverture, is there a specific avenue of research or field you hope to explore within this enmeshment of the two intelligences? Maybe, for example, in material innovation and architecture, like you're doing in the project in Buzzi, or involving bioclimactic architecture that's responsive in Modena. What are the ways in which you're trying to dialogue with this conversation?
Yes, I think, there's many, I think, and I would say two of them. I would say first we start from the office. Some of the things I'm very passionate about today is that we're looking at projects at the office that really don't use the traditional definition of architecture. We're doing they are more about ecosystem. We're working with the Aral Lake, one of the biggest ecological disasters of the past century. And how can we find solutions with nature, with different disciplines coming together to some of the problems? I will not tell you the whole story, but if you look it up, it's basically the biggest ecological disaster on this planet, just second probably only to climate change. And so if we're able to do something for the Aral Lake, I was there a couple of weeks ago, then we can learn something. It can help us as humanity for climate change, which is real, by the way. Politics can say whatever it wants, but just look at the numbers and look at the temperature outside. And so then that's some projects are really pushing the boundary in this direction. They use the methodology of design we discussed before, but in a way that tackles more complex ecological issues. Aral, we have another thing I cannot mention it in Antarctica, but it's along the same lines. Well, on the lab side, what we want to do, I'll tell you just this because that's what where we want to focus with the lab in Milan, Senseable City Milan.
Yeah.
Again, is
there a branch opening in Milan?
Yeah, because now after the Biennale, I'm going back. I've gone back to Milan for teaching in Milan, and so we are having this lab in Milan.
Oh, that's incredibly exciting.
We want to focus especially on data and health. Again, in the city, we know that the city is a key determinant of health. If you think about London, if you go east in London, every stop of the underground, you're actually losing quite a bit in your average lifespan. And I mean, of course, that depends on many things, on socioeconomics and so on, but somehow the city is also part of the exposome, all the things we're exposed to. And the exposome is vital to understand health, to understand not only lifespan, but also the health span. How healthy can we live? How long? And so in Milan, we're planning to use the same approach of sensible using data and exploring every tool at our disposal in order to make sense of this equation of health, with a sense, I think, is going to be cracked better very soon.
That's very exciting and a very hopeful conclusion for researchers or students to look forward to. I want to thank you again for speaking today and for coming on. Is there any way that students can interact or engage with your work? Any upcoming conferences or projects that will be out soon that you'd love for students to get to know more of?
Yeah, totally. I think the best way to keep in touch is through standard channels, social media on Instagram or so. But there's quite a few public things. And also for those of you, I know that your podcast has a global reach, but you're based in Milan. So if anybody's in Milan, do stop by the lab, send me an email, and then next time I'm on campus, we'll meet up.
Please, I would love to visit the lab. And I didn't know that there was one in Milan now. That's so exciting.
It's being generous at the moment. We've got a couple of people, but we're growing.
Oh, that's incredible. Well, thank you again, Carlo, for coming on today. Before we finish, I just want to show you one thing. I don't know if you remember. I mean, you obviously remember, but back in October, you came to Politecnico to give a talk for Architecture Week. And I actually, you wrote in my notebook here, you said, Salut Julien. I don't know if you can see it. It says Architecte du futur. So I wanted to show this to you. And show that
wonderful.
What you wrote back in October is just a full circle moment today, because now I get to converse with you and have meaningful conversations. So it was a very, very special.
Thank you for reminding me. I remember that in the presentation.
Yeah,
wonderful. So maybe the footnote for that is Architecte du futur, to be continued.
To be continued, exactly.
Wonderful talking.
Thank you so much again, Carlo, and wishing you a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
thank you
Carlo.
for having me.
Au revoir. Et
bye
meilleure continuation.
Au revoir.
Merci beaucoup, Carlo.
It was cool.
Hi everyone, it's your host Julian speaking again, and I wanted to share with you my immense gratitude for listening to the first season of Archfolio. Within the first 5 episodes, I've had such a pleasure recording each conversation, and it is an honor that I get to share my curiosity with you through a format I've dreamt up for so long. Thank you to all the incredible researchers, architects, and creatives I conversed with who believed in the project, and thank you to all my friends who believed in me. Also, a big shout out to the team at Poly Radio who always helped with technical difficulties and who gave me the space to record and pursue this project. Finally, thank you to you for tuning in each episode. I hope the spark and soul of each guest inspired you and opened your eyes to all the myriad ways architecture can be designed, practiced, and experienced. Once again, it's been an honor to be your host, and we'll be back in the fall for another ever-exciting season of adding to the Archfolio. In the meantime, stay curious, practice creativity, and pursue your passions. It's Julian signing off for now. I'll see you soon.